I think so. Sorry about that.
Good evening.
I just want to make sure I'm doing it right.
I'd like to call the Board of Finance Budget Workshop meeting for Thursday, March 7, 2019 to order. What I would like to do to begin is provide a bit of a format for this evening's meeting or workshop and how it will proceed so that we're all clear. We will begin tonight with public forum. I would indicate or let everyone know that this is public forum. There was the opportunity at the public budget hearing on Tuesday night for the public to ask questions. So there will not be a dialogue, but certainly public forum is going to be entertained at the beginning of the meeting. Item 2 will be consider and take possible action on the proposed fiscal year 2019-2020 budget. The way we will shape that is we will start with questions of the Board of Education from members of the Board of Finance. Board of Education will be represented by Dr. Paul Freeman. Then we will go to questions of the Board of Selectmen and the town budget by the Board of Finance members represented by First Selectman Hoey. I will then provide a briefer recap than I did the other night regarding where the budgets stand and what we're going to be possibly taking action on this evening. After all the questions and discussion of the budgets and consideration, we will then talk about bonded. I think we have a bonded number from the town that we will be receiving tonight for approval. We already have the Board of Education. Actually, that will be one of the questions I have tonight about the Board of Education's bonding. But once all of that is done, we will have public forum again. This is assuming that we move a budget this evening, and then we will adjourn. If we don't make a decision tonight, then there will be a workshop number 2 on Monday night. So, with that is the format for this evening. Item number 1 is public forum. Anybody wishing to address the Board of Finance in public forum, step right up. Name and address for the record, of course.
My name is Ted Zeus. I live at 72 Broad Street in Guilford. I'm here to share some thoughts about the budgeting process in the town of Guilford. Also share some data with the public who may or may not have the opportunity to see this on TV related to where we're at financially as a town and how we got here. The current budget, as presented, as we understand it, does not account for an anticipated up to $1 million of shortfall from state funds for the town of Guilford in the upcoming year, as outlined by the governor's budget that we all read in the recent edition of the Guilford Courier. And I guess I have a concern about that. I know that last year, and also the presentation on Tuesday night, suggested that our local representatives will have the ability to reverse that in the legislature, and then we will be fully funded by the state. From what I've been able to read, most of the financial gymnastics that allowed that to happen in the last budget process are no longer available. And so I think we as a town collectively should be more skeptical about it. We have a new governor, and I think he has less options available to him even than there were before. So I think that the Board of Finance should actually give some more thought to that. From 1950 to 2003, the Guilford Grand List grew on an average of 3.5% to 4% each year, and that's sort of the development driven by the construction of I-95. And local governments got in the habit of doing contractual agreements with their bargaining units, and it's a habitual behavior that we just do 3.5% spending increases every year. In 2003, that miracle sort of ended. I don't know if any of us remember what it was like in 2002, but that stopped. And so the grand list in 2008 was $3.45 billion. The grand list in 2017, according to the town's annual report, was $2.9 billion, which means we've had a change of $550 million, or a decrease of 18% in the grand list for the town. And if that's the economic engine that drives the town's ability to generate revenue, then we have less money available today than we did in the past as taxable assets. The town's worth less. The budget in 2008 was $70 million. We're discussing today a budget of $100 million. That's a change of $30 million in 10 years, or a 43% increase in spending. The mill rate's gone from 19.19 to 31.2. That's a change of 12 mills in 10 years, or a 62% increase in the mill rate, averaging 6.2% a year. Over the same period of time, inflation from 2008 to 2018 was 15.5%, or 1.5%. So the government spending over that 10-year period of time has actually grown at 3 times the rate of inflation here in the town of Guilford. And that explains the 62% increase in the mill rate. One of the other statistics is that we now have 400 fewer students in the school system than we did 10 years ago. That's a 12% decrease in enrollment. And so, from my point of view, I don't mind the ask. In the budgeting process that the Board of Finance and the Board of Ed's gone through, everybody presented their budgets, and they've all heard everybody's requests, and there have been some things that have been approved, and there's some things that have been disapproved. Tonight, the Board of Finance may or may not decide to cut further funding. But the concern I have is that with the mill rate at going to be approaching 32, our taxes now in Guilford are going to be 20% higher than they are either in Madison or in Branford at the same time. And if we look at cities where the tax rate grows this quickly without the economic development to support it, I think we have potential long-term, if you play this out over another 10 years, that Guilford has the potential to start to look like some of the cities that have mill rates in the 40 and the 50. And one of the unintended consequences of that is everybody's home values actually go down. People just simply can't afford to live there. There's only so much money people can spend to live on a given year. And, you know, we discussed that the grand list in Guilford this year grew by 0.5%. That's the extra money that we have. In the private sector, I'm pretty sure that most people over the last 10 years didn't see a 60% increase in their pay from 2008 to date. So somewhere along the line, the taxes that they're asking to pay to live here are taking away from other things that they might like to do, either maintain their own homes, maintain their own cars, or do other things that they have to do in town. I think the other concern that I've heard articulated is that we now have salary levels among bargaining units where we have some positions that start to exceed the standard of living of the constituency that or the members of the public that these people serve. And so the question is, at what point is it okay that on a year like this, instead of agreeing to another 3.5% spending increase, that we just say we can live with last year's budget? There was enough money to run the town last year, and if it was enough last year, why can't we make that work again for 2019? Because I'm pretty sure that most people in the town don't have an extra 3.5% money raise in income this year, based on what we're aware of. And I guess that's it. The other thing that I heard in the presentation on Tuesday was that one of the driving forces among the budget increase were the contractual agreements. And I heard an interesting comment today when I was talking to somebody that basically a town without a budget doesn't have contractual agreements. And if we decide as a town to collectively have a revenue neutral budget for next year, and we have to go back and discuss our contractual agreements with all of our bargaining units, then we might have to do that, because that would be the budget for next year. And I think those of us who've been around in town government long enough have actually experienced that, and we've had years where we've talked to everybody and we've done that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Come on up.
Hello again. Susan Anderhagen, 200 Landon's Way. Before moving here, I was a vice president managing a $75 million budget for Verizon. More than 80% of my budget was my staff, so not that dissimilar to some of the organizations here. And when I came up with my budget every year, no one ever said to me, come up with a budget that you want, and then we'll cut back from there. The chief financial officer said to me every year, you have an X percent cut, you have a 5% cut, you have a 10% cut, year over year. And we had to figure it out. And only when your back is against the wall do you get creative about saving money and finding things like efficiencies of scale, or what are we going to stop doing, or how can we bring in additional revenue to offset my increased costs. So when I look at some of our budget, it makes me wonder, don't people need the backs against the wall? Those are the kind of things where someone is going to have to figure out regionalization. I look at things that we should stop doing, and we talked yesterday about the golf course. So I looked back at previous budgets. In the 2017 to 2018 budget, the golf course lost or was projected to lose, because what we have is on the budgets is the projected income. I don't know if that's what we saw. It was projected to lose $68,000. Then in 2018 to 2019, it was projected to lose $98,000. And this year on the budget, it's projected to lose $101,000. So to me, one of the things you should look at is maybe this is the year we don't run the golf course and we see how many people scream, because that would be a savings of, I don't know, the budget for this year is $283,000. I assume if we didn't run the golf course, we wouldn't save all that because we'd still have to cut the grass and do whatever. Or, I'm sorry, I don't know if the pro is here, but get rid of the pro, because we've talked about for the last several years that if it didn't break even, then we shouldn't have a pro working there. Then I look at things like, if with people's backs against the wall, do we really need a fireboat? I have no idea when we bought it. I don't know how many fires that we've used the fireboat for. I have a boat. I know how much money it costs to have a boat. It's like, as they say, it's a money pit to have a boat. So when I look on the budget, it said the fireboat costs $5,000. I find that hard to believe that that's the only cost, and whether everything that's costing us is in that dollar amount. The other thing that I just have to question that's in the budget for this year is buying a garbage truck and then having someone additional to run a garbage truck. And I think I heard in the meeting the other day that we called every garbage company in the area, no one will pick up on the weekend. And I appreciate the fact that I also live in this town. I don't want garbage overflowing on the weekend, so I understand the need, but I just find it really hard to believe that there's not a single garbage collection company in all of the shoreline that won't come and pick up on the weekends. And once we buy a truck, now you have the maintenance for that truck. And in terms of regionalization, again, Matt, the other day you talked about why we now need the wash bays, and I would ask, why can't we regionalize those wash bays? Why can't we share them with 3 other towns? Do we really need just our own? So again, to me, it's only when your backs are against the wall that you find these creative things. If every year my budget for my organization, if someone had said to me, what do you need? And then cut it back from there, believe me, our budgets would have skyrocketed as well. And as someone who moved to this town in 2015, I knew what my taxes were going to be on my house when I moved here, but what I did not count for is that they were going to go up 3% or so every year. And at some point in time, my husband and I, who both moved here after my daughter was out of school, so didn't get the benefit of the schools, at some point we have to say, you know, how much can we take and afford to pay for our taxes?
Thank you. Anybody else wishing to address the board in public forum? Come on up.
Hi, I'm Jamie Mickelay. I live on Willow Road in town, and I just want to say thanks to everybody that did put the budget together. I know there's a lot of time and effort that went into it. I do have a question about the debt service, and my information might be online, and maybe I just didn't find it in the right spot. But I was wondering if somebody could explain to me if the debt service did go up 12%, other than the high school, which I am more than happy to pay for. What other things are included in that debt service? And if somebody could explain, like next year, what other things would we be voting on that would also be tacked onto that, or maybe there isn't going to be anything. But I have a feeling as buildings age, there's a plan, and I actually like the plan because I like driving around town and I like seeing that the library's cared for. I like that our schools are taken care of. And when I go to vote for the budget, if I know what I'm voting for and I know what I'm supporting, I feel more strongly about it, and I'm really proud to pay for it. But I just have a question about that. And then my other question is, if state funding continues to go down each year, what things is our town doing, and what can we do to offset that? So that's really my only questions.
Great, thank you. I'm sure at some point they'll be answered. Try to get to them. Any other members of the public wishing to address the board in public forum? Okay, Board of Finance. We will start with asking any questions that we have of the Board of Education. So let's just allow Dr. Freeman to possibly meander his way forward. And Board Member Katie Ballestraci. Members of the board, I could start, but if anybody else wants to start,
Why don't
gladly.
we let the chairman?
All right. The one question, well, I have a couple questions, but I wanted to just, on the bonding for tonight, just wanted to make sure, is the bonding intended to be a one-year bond? Do you intend to go out just for this year for the bonding of the three, or do you intend a two-year bond? Because I know there was some discussion recently about going with, being on the town and then not bonding in every other year.
Correct.
Just want to make sure.
In the materials that we provided you, we showed you what this year and next year plans include.
Right. Yes.
But the bond that we've provided in the presentation and that we presented Tuesday evening is a one-year bond only for that flat $3 million, and it would provide for the HVAC and for the windows projects at Cox and then Jones respectively. Mm-hmm. We did consider a two-year bond, but that would have required us, if we're staying on the schedule that we've created, next year, we plan to be looking at the HVAC at Guilford Lakes. We have an elevator replacement at Melissa Jones. We have electrical upgrades and roof projects at Adams. And so if we were to bring it forward as a two-year request, we would have likely brought forward a request for a $7 million bond this year. Mm-hmm. And then there'd be no need to do the additional request next year. Right. We discussed it, and the board decided to bring forward a $3 million request this year. But barring any failures, you could expect that we'd be back this time next year with approximately a $4 million request. We're working very slowly and methodically through that 10-year calendar that we put together some years back. The main focus is on HVAC systems. With the exception of the high school, we've got systems that are giving us problems. You know that we opened this year to failures at lakes significantly. Mm-hmm. And we plan to remedy that next year with that project that we'll request next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Want me to take a turn?
Sure.
Okay, how you doing tonight?
Hi,
Nice to see you, Dr. Freeman. Nice to see you, Dr. Ballestraci. I wanted to talk a little bit about some comments you made in the public hearing just 2 days ago. Mm-hmm. In the budget presentation, you talked about the savings in salary costs that you achieved as experienced and higher paid teachers were retiring, and they were replaced by less expensive and lower paid teachers. So the question is, isn't there a similar opportunity for savings as experienced administrators retire?
So generally, no. In the administrative contract that we have that covers all administrators short of the central office positions, those positions do not have 13 steps the way that the teacher's contract does. So essentially, a teacher who comes on board at half of the total salary, takes 13 years to work his or her way up to full salary. The administrative contract, in fact, simply has flat salaries. So when a principal retires, we rehire at that flat salary. The one exception to that would be when a central office position like superintendent, assistant superintendent, or associate superintendent retires. So in that case, there are no contractual salaries. Those are negotiated individually. So this year, there should be some expectation that when the board fills the vacancy created by Dr. Keene's retirement, there may be some savings related to that position. That will not be known for sure until the board selects a candidate. We negotiate a salary with that candidate, but yes, there could be some anticipated savings around that one administrative position. It's unusual, and it would only apply to positions like superintendent, assistant, and associate superintendent.
So as the follow-up question, of course, I was referring to the retirement of
Dr. Keene?
Dr. Keene, and it's been my understanding that just maybe 4 or 5 years ago that the structure, the administrative structure, did not have 2 assistant superintendents, and that maybe there's an opportunity to return to a structure where we only have 1 assistant superintendent and offer the position for managing curriculum at a director level for savings of, we could debate the savings, but some savings annually for Guilford taxpayers.
Sure. We could absolutely repackage that position and label it differently, call it a director rather than assistant superintendent. You would not draw the same caliber of candidates. You wouldn't have the same competitive pool for a director position that you would draw for an assistant superintendent position. The candidates that we looked at for this position were nationally recognized candidates, and to replace Dr. Keene, that's the caliber that this school district deserves. So yes, we could have repackaged it, we could have looked at lowering the salary, but I absolutely believe that that would impact the quality of the candidate and ultimately the work that would happen in the position. The board hasn't filled the position. The board certainly still has the opportunity to do that, but at this point I'm moving forward and preparing to bring a candidate to the Board of Education as an assistant superintendent, and am thrilled with the quality of the candidates that we had to choose from going through that process.
If I may also add, and just to clarify, at least for the viewing public, right, that when an associate, when Dr. Keene was made an associate superintendent, and we had for the first time an assistant superintendent, that was not a new position, it was a new title. It was at the time that Andy Potocny was retiring, and it became really quite clear that in order to allow our superintendent to do the job we really wanted him to do, and to allow our business department to do the job that they needed to do, that slight restructuring would allow us to operate much more smoothly, really centralize HR functions, and really allow Dr. Freeman to do the job we need him to do. So I just want to be really clear that taking away a position it would really take away a position. It's not that we ever had these fewer positions, that is that we refocused that particular position.
That's right.
Do you recall what Andy's position was before they created the assistant superintendent position?
Andy Potocny was an 8/10 business manager, I believe. We took the position that he vacated and we repackaged it as a 1.0 assistant superintendent for operations. So when we restructured central office, the increase in FTE was minimal. It was an increase of 0.2. It was not a whole new position that was created.
But a higher paying position was created.
Not significantly higher, except for the increase to 1.0. Yes. It did allow us, however, by repackaging as an assistant superintendent, what was important to us is that we wanted to have somebody with educational background and understanding in that business office, so that it wasn't simply somebody with an accounting background or a business background, but somebody with a deep educational background and understanding. When our business office says no to principals, I want it to be hard. I want them to understand why they're saying no to a principal and what the educational impact of that decision is. And so we wanted to have somebody with educational credentials and background. And again, by packaging that as an assistant superintendent, we were able to draw those candidates into that search.
What would you think would roughly be the difference between a director position and a assistant superintendent position in terms of salary and benefits?
It's all semantics. I'm sure that if I looked hard enough, I could find you director positions that paid commensurate to assistant superintendent positions. It's going to have to do with the community that you're in. I can tell you now, I'm aware of assistant superintendent positions in Fairfield County that pay more than superintendent positions on the shoreline pay. So it's generally a matter of semantics, and it's a matter of the local competition. I don't have that information available, but I could find it for you.
Okay. I'll let someone else take a turn.
Ken?
Yeah, we talk about administrative positions as going to the top drawer and so forth. Now, in the past 3 years, just as a case in point, where we have hired new teachers, new positions, let's not say new teachers, have we made a conscious effort to hire at the lower range of salary, or have we gone for the best available person?
In areas where we are not facing certification shortages, I have in the last several years placed hiring caps on principals. I have encouraged them to hire at fewer years of experience in areas where we know that we have deep candidate pools. And so those would be certification areas like social studies, English language arts 7 through 12, elementary K through 6. In other areas that are recognized statewide and some nationwide as shortage areas, those would be areas like science, math, and particularly for us regionally, it would be world language. In those positions, we have allowed principals more latitude in hiring because we have a much smaller pool, and in fact, we need to draw people out of other neighboring districts. The same has applied when we have hired really specialized special educational positions, or when we have had vacancies that we knew would likely need to fill department chair positions at the high school. So it really depends on the vacancy. 8 years ago, we were less likely to place caps. We were saying find the best candidate bar none, and that has not. And again, if you remember the slide we showed with the budget history, the last 4 years we have come in with budgets that were 1.5%. 1 year it was below 1%. Those are reflective of the hiring caps that we have placed and the savings that we generate with those hirings. This budget does account for approximately $200,000 of savings recognized from retirements, so we will be placing those same caps in those same certification areas in this coming budget cycle.
Just to follow up on that, though, my understanding is that while we're hiring staff at entry level, the savings that we realize are substantial for that first year, but there's much more volatility in terms of the step increases that the entry level teachers face than you do with the senior staff. Is that accurate?
That's exactly accurate. So, if one teacher retires at the top this year and we hire a teacher in at first step this year, we will recognize a savings of $20,000 to $30,000. But then we will pay back in step increases that difference over the next 13 years. So when you hire lots of people at the lower end of that salary scale, you do see, right, this year we're projecting a savings of approximately $200,000 because of those savings. But next year, we will have 6 more people or 5 more people who will now be moving through steps for the next 13 years, and that will show salary increases every year. So there's one savings up front, and then you pay that back over the next 13 years as teachers work their way to their full salary.
And not to get too deep into the weeds here, but if a teacher, say you hire someone who's just graduated from college, they're certified, and you bring them in as an elementary education teacher. They can then pursue a master's degree, and when they get that master's degree, they go on to a different track, so to speak.
Exactly correct.
And then that same teacher could then go and get a sixth year, seventh year degree, and then they'd be on a different track, again, assuming at a higher level. So the opportunities for that entry level teacher to accelerate at perhaps for lack of a better term, a faster rate than they would have had they just stayed with their associate's degree. They can do that, correct?
That's exactly correct. The salary scale is 13 vertical steps and 3 horizontal columns. And if you hire somebody in with a bachelor's degree in year 1, they have 13 years to gain additional degrees and gain more experience, and those individuals want to work their way from the bottom left-hand corner of that chart to the top right-hand corner of that chart. Additionally, there is a small stipend associated with a doctoral degree that is awarded. Doesn't change year to year, but there's a small stipend associated with earning a doctorate.
So you realize the savings early on, but then there can be a fairly rapid increase in this. But once the teacher has reached the top level, once they've made it to that top right-hand corner of the graph, then they've plateaued effectively, other than the negotiated wage increases year after year.
There are minimal increases. If all of our staff were sitting at top step today, we'd obviously have a larger salary line that we'd be talking about. But the increase year over year would be approximately 1% or 1.5%, because the raises for the people at that top step are minimal. The increases comes in those less experienced employees who are moving their way through those salary steps. That's exactly correct.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, I have a question for you regarding this, on the altogether modest, super modest part of your scale. You've hired, I don't know if you've actually hired a person, but you've retained a person at a fee of $10,000 to be your art consultant, or to help us at least cultivate a program in art to respond to the public expressions in that area. Where are you going with that?
So that's actually not monies set aside for an individual hire. Those are actually monies that we're envisioning using to provide club opportunities at the elementary schools after school.
Where are you going with that?
It was an attempt to respond to the interest we heard in more art opportunities for students, recognizing that the board and the administration, neither one of us knew how we would go about creating more art time within the school day. Right now, we have the shortest elementary school day of any school district in all of DERG A or B. Right now, there are pressures to add more recess time, add more art time, and so it's not just the budgetary impact of adding 2 additional positions that we were concerned about. It was about where to find that time in the school day. So our response to the sincere interest in having art be a part of every child's day falls into 2 categories. One, we will work more intentionally with our classroom teachers to make sure that visual arts are integrated into the regular classroom experiences, which in fact is how Connecticut speaks to the art standards. So as students are engaged in reading activities, writing activities, science activities, social studies activities, we're going to be looking more intentionally at the Connecticut art standards and finding ways to make sure that our regular classroom teachers are incorporating those standards and those opportunities into the regular instruction. And then additionally, we set aside a sum of money that would allow us to offer stipends to teachers who are interested in providing that opportunity, and monies to provide supplies. That won't be available to every student. That will only be available to students who have the opportunity to stay after school, whose parents can provide for them to be able to stay after school and have transportation. It's an imperfect solution, but it was an attempt to respond to the interest that was expressed, even though we felt we were not in a position to add 2 full-time FTEs or to find time in an already tight schedule to meet that interest.
Mike, I have 2 questions. On the bonding for the Cox HVA system, when do you anticipate doing that work? This summer or next summer?
This summer. The engineering has been completed. We would expect to be able to have bids on the street immediately following approval at referendum, and we would hope to be able to complete that over the summer. You know that when we're doing these one-year bonds, we often are rushing against that first day of school, and some of the projects, particularly the windows project at Adams was one of our best examples. Even this year, the window project at Baldwin. Sometimes we end up finishing after hours and weekends, but the goal is to complete it over the summer.
And then a few minutes ago, you said next year for lakes.
Correct.
In light of all the repairs that we've had relative to our heating and air conditioning in some of the schools, was there consideration to switching the Melissa Jones windows for the Lakes HVAC?
Yes, but it was a big move, and all of the repairs that have been made at Lakes have been made knowing that we have the big, the repairs that we're making are repairs to get us through to next summer. We're not coming in and doing broad, long-lasting repairs, so we are still targeting next year. We're still working intentionally through that. We think that we will be able to keep the system running for that long, but exactly right. Again, engineering is always sort of lagging. We have the engineering for the Cox and the Melissa Jones projects ready to go to bid. We don't have the engineering for that project completed and ready to pull forward. So 5 years ago, if we had known, we might have scheduled this differently, but to schedule it differently now, we could delay Cox, but we're not ready to move Lakes up by a year. The engineering work hasn't been done.
Thank you.
Excellent segue. So regarding the bonding, the AE for future projects, that is part of the bonding package that we're looking at. Is that for next year? Is that for the next 2020 projects?
Correct.
That's the use the future projects are. What you're talking about is to get ahead of that.
Correct.
And then have all the numbers
more
defined.
Yes, and if I recall, it was at the suggestion of the Standing Building Committee that if we are prepping these in advance, we have more shovel-ready projects so that when a referendum decides up or down in April, if it's an approval, then we're ready to get the bid on the street and begin moving and getting materials delivered for that summer work. That's exactly correct. And this A and E in this bond would help us to get that Lakes project ready so that we can then present it to all of you next year. Now, if it were a 2-year approval, that would be fine because we'd have all this coming year to work on that, but we still wouldn't be able to get the work completed this summer. Simply not ready to go.
Okay.
Could you just clarify? I know there was a question about enrollment earlier, and I think the numbers might have been a little off. Can you actually clarify where we are with enrollment?
So I don't believe the numbers are off. The numbers that we show on our enrollment slide are the students that we have in our 7 local Guilford schools. If you look at some of the enrollment numbers that may be identified on the state paperwork, those are going to be including our outplacements, students who may be enrolled in VOTEC or VOAG programs but have Guilford addresses. I believe it may even include at times students who are enrolled in magnet programs but carry Guilford addresses. So it's just that to simplify for our conversation, the slide I shared on Tuesday shows only those students in our 7 local schools.
Thank you.
So it wouldn't include students who are a special needs student who is being placed out of district, for
We're
example?
not showing those outplaced students, or more significantly, students who may reside in Guilford but attend VOTEC, VOAG, magnet opportunities that the state offers, other choice programs. The state still counts those in their reporting, but we don't show them because we're not scheduling or programming for teachers in front of those students.
And those are individual choices for the most part?
Yes.
Go to a magnet, yeah.
Absolutely, yep. Same thing for VOTEC and VOAG.
Yep.
Students and families make that decision.
All right, so this is kind of an annual tradition for me to sort of tip my hat to the Board of Education and your administration for some good work in managing special ed, which is got quite a few challenges, and particularly in trying to bring students in-house by offering them quality services that are actually costing the town less than having the students go outside of the town for the special ed. But I guess I got to twist this around, though, and say, what are you doing for us this year? Are you able to expand on that? Are we going to be able to take that even further and try and pull more students in-house? Because even though progress has been made and you've showed us some exhibits that the increases in special ed would have been steeper if not for the in-house programs, we're still spending a lot more money on special ed each year, and it's one of those costs that's difficult to control and, of course, deliver quality service.
It's also a savings that's difficult to quantify because it's hard to measure costs that have been avoided. And so, we show you the graph and we add that fictional line at the end about the course we had been on, but it's hard to identify costs that we haven't avoided. I appreciate the compliment because we're incredibly proud of the work that we have done, and there's two comments that I would make. One is, yes, we are continuing to expand. So didn't show it visually on a slide Tuesday night, but I mentioned that 2 of our programs are extending this year, right? The behavioral support programs that we have moved into the elementary and middle schools will be extending into the high school this year. And a therapeutic support program that has been very successful at the high school will be reaching down into 7th and 8th grades at Adams this year. Both of those expansions are happening with existing staff. We're not bringing in any new teaching positions. We're not asking for any additional para positions. So again, we're offering more services, but we're covering those with additional staffing. Additionally, our special education identification rate in the state, in Guilford, is low compared to most of the state. We identify 11.4% of our students with special education labels. There are some communities in Connecticut that are identifying 20% of their population as special education. One of the ancillary benefits to having the services in the school is that we oftentimes are able to intervene with students early on before they've been identified. And we know that if you get students' interventions early on in their development, they may not go on to be identified for special education later on in their career. So we're incredibly proud of what we've done. As you said, we feel we provide a better product for the students with special needs at a lower cost, but we also know that it benefits the population in general. I don't believe that we would have seen that low special education identification rate were it not for the special education programs, capacity, staff, and supports that we have in the schools. And I don't know if that makes sense. I know it may sound counterintuitive,
I think it does. Maybe that's kind of some long-term cost avoidance because you bring the student up to speed and they really become mainstreamed and back into the regular group, I think.
And I know that in past
I'm understanding.
conversations, and it was probably you, Mr. Trotta, that asked me about special education staffing and what amount of salary. I always hesitate to break out special education salary because special education teachers do not work exclusively with special education students. They mainstream into our classrooms and they work with regular education non-identified students as well. And that same applies to school counselors, school social workers, school psychologists. So it's very hard to tease out what percentage of the day a school counselor spends with special education students and non-special education students. And we don't want to account for it that way. We want teachers in the schools supporting all of our kids. And when you do that, it benefits all of the students in the community, not just the students who've been identified with special needs.
So just to recap, specifically, you've got a program that's in the middle school and you're going to extend it to the high school, the 2 programs I think you mentioned?
One program going from elementary and middle into high, and
Yep.
one program going from the high school down into the middle schools. 2 expansions this year, neither
Okay.
one with an additional FTE request.
Any new programs and any more ability to have students from other districts participate and then to have them subsidize costs by participating in the program?
No and yes. Nothing that's completely new this
Okay.
year. We're continuing to grow what we've done. And yes, as we have this year and in a few past years, we will have the opportunity next year if a neighboring district has the need to take in a small number of students And again, only where we have capacity and only where it will not impact the education that we're providing to our local Guilford students. But in some few occasions, we have sent out bills for tuition as a tuition destination rather than always sending checks out to the places that we have sent
I think
students.
that was new this budget year, or maybe last budget year? you
Last year may have
started
been the
to do
first
that?
time that we did, and this year, again, very small number, but yes, we do have the opportunity to help neighboring communities and bill for that help.
Okay.
The only thing I wanted to add is that we, as Dr. Freeman said, and we were very proud of these programs and really capturing the savings of kids who then can stay in our community. Not just the financial savings, which is what we're talking about tonight, but really a better quality of education, kids that
much
are
more
right
profound
in the
than just the
community
dollars.
with their peers, et cetera.
Understood.
But the other thing you have to understand is, right, so when we have grown these programs, the kids who then are being outplaced at that point are children who have more significant needs, right? So that our ability to continually increase the number of kids we bring back, or saying in another way, reduce the number of kids that go out, gets a little bit harder, right, as we expand, because because again, the kids then, given the great programs that we have, who are being outplaced at this point, are kids who have greater needs. So I want to express that we as a board and as an administration are really committed to trying to serve as many of these kids in-house as we can, but there are always going to be young people whose needs are just so significant that it would be inappropriate for us to try to educate them in-house when really their needs require more than we can give.
Understood. I have a few more for you, but I'll keep the questions circulating.
Anyone else?
Oh, I'm still up, okay. I got another one for you. This one might be a little bit harder, but I kind of am worried about the debt levels that we have because of the high school, and sort of been preaching for many years that we need to kind of pace our capital spending besides the high school, just because that was a pick and that was a priority, and I think we did a great thing. But, even as our residents have come up and asked, what other things are contributing to this high debt load? So, considering that Guilford taxpayers are paying a pretty large portion of their tax dollar to debt servicing, maybe historically the highest amount, I would ask the Board of Education and the school if they might consider taking their two major projects they usually have the last couple of years for bonding requests and pacing it down to one major project per year.
So, I'm going to answer it in this way, right? One of the things we learned about building this new high school is that it does not pay to put off servicing and maintaining the buildings that you have. We have a pretty thorough plan for projects moving forward, and really based on balancing the needs of these buildings, trying to maintain them long-term, and the cost to the taxpayer. So I would say that the board is really committed to trying to strive a really good balance there, but recognize that there is not going to be any appetite anytime in the near future for a new school building. So we must do our due diligence to make sure that we maintain the ones that we have. That may not be a satisfactory answer, or may not exactly answer your question, but I think for us, it's really that balance, and it's really important to make sure that we do that. As Ms. Wallace mentioned earlier, I mean, we had a problem with this HVAC at Lakes, which is a project not for this summer, but one we would like to propose in the future. And so we have been very careful to try to figure out how to keep that going so we don't bring that in earlier. But we can't put that off, right? We can't keep putting that off. And I think that's the way it is with a lot of these projects. I don't know if you have anything to add?
I agree completely. You know, putting off the HVAC work for this summer, I think would be ill-advised because we're having HVAC failures. Putting off a window project, I believe, will result in energy loss that we don't need to experience and water damage in the future, right? We'll end up spending more every time we push these projects out. And it's easy to look at these two projects and say, can we push one of these? But we've got 5 more years of a 10-year plan that we put together. 3 years ago, we did defer on these projects, and we would have lakes ready to go if we hadn't deferred on capital projects 3 years ago. I worry that every time we push one project back 1 year, we're backing some other project up from year 4 to year 5. And if we have a catastrophic failure, then we're not going to be planful and we're not going to be getting our best dollar. When you have to replace something after a catastrophic failure, it's always going to cost more than if you do it thoughtfully and in a thoughtful maintenance plan.
Okay.
For what it's worth, we go over that question every single year. In our operations meeting, we went around all the projects that we're looking at in the next 2 years, pushed Mr. Gurnham on every one of those questions. Until I stand in front of you, I'm the one asking all of those questions, Jonathan, but once I come in front of you with the proposal, then I'm the guy saying, no, we can't defer these projects. The ones that got here are the ones that need to move forward.
All right, I've got a couple more questions, if you can stomach them.
We'd like to get the town up here at some point. I'll give you
2
one.
more?
Quick.
All right. So the next one would be that we haven't had reductions in enrollment as large as a study that we did maybe 10 years ago, but we have had reductions in enrollment year after year. And I know when I first entered the board, me and you spoke, and I think Keith Bishop spoke a lot about balancing class sizes. And I think I might have gotten the right reference here. I think question was, can you balance class sizes according to policy 6011, I think it is, which is the superintendent's recommended class sizes. So, and I'm just curious, have you done that analysis recently? I remember doing it 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah, we remain on target within those policies. We're not smaller than those targets suggest. And again, what I'll mention is, the slide that I showed on Tuesday shows a reduction of some 280 students over the last 6 or 7 years. Remember that those students are spread across 7 schools, 13 grade levels. And in those 6 or 7 years, we have expanded special education offerings, often as this year, without bringing on additional staffing. We've added an international baccalaureate program to the high school without additional staffing associated with it. So what we have been able to do is we've been able to leverage those modest declines compared to other communities into program improvements. So rather than taking them, we could have taken them as reductions, but then we wouldn't have had the special education expansion to the degree that we have it with the associated benefits. We wouldn't have an international baccalaureate program unless we had added FTEs to the requests to do that. So we've been able to leverage those requests in the way that we have looked at servicing. The special education programming that we provide has a much lower student-to-teacher ratio than the regular classrooms, and so that's why we've been able to offer more programming, even though we have to keep staffing at a similar level.
And I will say, I mean, we as a board look at enrollment at least twice a year, if not more. I mean, we are well aware of what's going on in our neighboring districts. We know that other districts are closing schools. I was at a regional board meeting within the last 2 months where we have some of our smaller towns who are having to rethink potentially in the future, rethink what they can offer in their high schools because of lowering enrollment. We are simply not experiencing anything at that level. But we pay very close attention to that. We are well aware that if we have any particular grade in any particular school, and that's really the unit of measurement we're looking at, that would allow us to reduce a teacher or not, refill a position, we will do that. We're totally prepared to do that. We are just not seeing the decline happen in those units. They're just spread over, as Dr. Freeman said, 7 schools and 13 grades.
Okay, I'll try to make this last one pretty quick. I mean, it's pretty similar to my other question about your bonding request. But, you know, given that we've got a pretty flat grand list and maybe losing some revenue from the state and, you know, taxpayers are obviously picking up the bill. And, you know, like someone put so eloquently, not all of them are getting a 3% increase in their pay. Would you consider maybe not taking on so much general fund capital spending? I think it's on your on-site improvement line. I see some schools have 3 or 4 projects. Could you pace it down to maybe 2 or 1 projects per school?
Quick answer is yes, of course we could, but for all of the reasons and rationale that Dr. Balistraci shared around the major bonded projects, I would say the same applies and probably in multiples. We ended up reducing that line significantly some years ago when the budget failed, and we continue to try to rebuild the budget back to the level where it was. Those projects include things like carpet replacement, floor and ceiling tile replacement, bathroom renovations, and again, we have a calendar where we try to do as much of those renovations every year before we have carpets that are creating mold problems or bathrooms that are leaking and creating water damage or ceiling tiles that are crumbling because of staining. So it is an upkeep maintenance budget. We're not back to the levels I believe we were at some years ago. So yes, of course we could. And if this board decides to make reductions, that's certainly an area that we would look at. But I'm loath to do that because once we stop maintaining our buildings, we create a maintenance deficit. It's much more likely that we will not get the full life out of any of those 6 older buildings that we expect to get out of it. Communities that fail to upkeep their buildings end up getting to a tipping point and then needing to build a new school. And we're not looking to do that. We want to get as much life out of these 6 buildings as possible, and to do that you need to invest in it. Same analogy applies to all of our cars. If you don't change the oil, you save $60 every few months, but you're not going to get the life out of that car that you would if you maintained it according to the owner's manual.
And you know, I won't pretend that all of these are directly related to student safety, but some of them certainly are, right? I mean, we need to have carpets that don't have mold in them for kids to have a safe environment to learn in, right? We need windows that are secure. So I do want to remind people that this isn't just about keeping a building standing. It's providing a safe, healthy environment for our kids to spend 6.5, 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, 9 months a year.
Just make one brief comment. I just wanted to thank you for your work and your contribution. You know, I do ask some questions about what might be nice to have, what's critical for taxpayers, but we do appreciate the hard work that goes into these budgets.
And we appreciate all the good questions. We're really proud of what we do, and we're happy to have this conversation with you and explain where each dollar goes. I appreciate the process. Thank you all very much.
Jeff has a follow-up, and then I have one final question, then we're good.
So, for example, over the last few months, we've seen the number of emergency HVAC repair bills. And so when those types of, I mean, it's tough to budget for emergency repairs like that, or for example, the replacement of the septic system at the Calvin Leeds School that took place just prior to the school year starting last summer. So when something like that happens, where does the school system typically look to cover those unanticipated expenses out of the funds that have been budgeted to it?
Very often it is from that site improvement line, and we end up doing exactly right. We end up reprioritizing. So we would like to stay ahead of all of our needs and follow a preventative maintenance approach. But when something fails, then that gets to the top of that list, and very often it comes right out of that site improvement line. And in the years that we have lots of unexpected repairs, like this year, we then do start to fall behind, and it exacerbates then the damage done if we reduce that line, if we cut it. In a year like this one, where we had to change priorities because of emergent needs, a reduction would have a double impact.
I have a fair and yet dangerous question, I guess. And I'm asking this because I attended the public hearings with the Board of Ed. I attended both nights. You mentioned last night that, and I'll just summarize, the salaries and the tuition basically added $1.52 million to the budget. Just those 2 line items.
Correct.
And yet the budget is, the increase is under 1.2. So there was a lot of cutting, at least by the Board of Ed. But then I heard there's a couple of investments here, this professional development, and these are not large amounts. 25,000, 10 each for the 2 clubs.
Smallest investments we've brought forward in my time in town.
Yes. So my question is, and it's really for the people that were there at those public hearings with the Board of Ed, if there were any reductions, what are your thoughts are on those particular programs? Are they, do you have, I mean, we can't, and I restate this every single time I can on camera, the Board of Finance can't tell the Board of Education, where to cut. But when it comes to any reductions, what are your thoughts on if there was reductions with the public outpouring of support for art? And I know there were a couple of others, but art had probably the most input, and I respect that. I mean, there was at least 15, maybe even 20 people that came out and supported art, and so I just wanted to have you address that.
And we may need to answer that differently this year. Every year we get the question, if there's a reduction, where would that reduction fall? And most years we are able to say that we have a significant new investment we're looking to make. And so if we have a significant reduction, we won't be able to go forward with full day kindergarten, or we won't be able to launch international baccalaureate programming. All of those new investments that you're talking about this year, I believe, total to be less than $50,000. Yes. So a significant decrease at this time probably would have little impact on those because the number is so small. A significant decrease from the Board of Finance at this time would require us to look at larger lines. If this board were to make a deep cut, we would likely be looking at class sizes throughout the system, right? There's not a lot of new in the budget that we're proposing. I wouldn't begin eliminating programs wholesale, but we would likely begin looking at class sizes and figuring out how to spread that and how to do that with the least impact. A more modest reduction from this board might have us looking a little differently at things like small reductions to lots of lines, like site improvement. We would try to identify where to, small reductions you can tend to spread out across multiple lines, but a significant 80% of our budget goes into the people expenditure. So any real significant cut at this time, we would be forced to look at staffing.
And I simply asked the question because of the public support for those particular items that.
It's just the right question to ask.
I just wanted that. I want to make sure it got, yeah, I just want to make sure it was addressed. I don't want, yeah.
That's right.
Absolutely.
I mean, when Dr. Freeman brought his proposed budget to the Board of Ed, we brought it down to just below 2. And I said at that time that this is not a flexible budget. There is not a lot of room for movement. There was not a lot of room for movement the night that the Board of Ed took some money out of the proposed budget that Dr. Freeman brought to us. So, we would have to do some careful consideration if that were to happen.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And now that we've grilled the Board of Education, are you ready for Selectman Hoey? So, members of the Board of Finance, any questions regarding the town budget and of Mr. Hoey? Actually, I would like to start the questioning.
Sure.
And I figure we would just address it immediately since you're up here regarding a summary sheet.
Yep.
That we, just so the public knows, that we do have a sheet that indicates budgets and where they fall and how it affects mill rates.
Correct.
It's a very helpful sheet to tell us where we stand and where the different parameters are that we can look at. There was a change this morning that we had an updated sheet, and so I just wanted to make sure you could address that for the board members regarding what that entailed.
Certainly, I'd be happy to. And in fact, the change happened yesterday. You just learned about it this morning. There were two not major, there were two changes to the revenue side. The first of which was the renter's rebate program, which we had been assessed by the state for the last couple of years. We were forced to make a contribution to the renter's rebate program. It was enacted, I believe it was 2 years ago, and the number was about $80,000. As is my custom when I have nothing else to do, I read things like the Council of Small Towns summaries on legislation that was passed over the last year that might affect municipalities. And I was actually looking at that towards the latter part of last week and saw that the legislature had passed a bill that eliminated the state's ability to charge us for that renter's rebate program. So I talked to OPM. I would have talked about this on Tuesday night, but I hadn't heard back from OPM to confirm. So that's why we have increased our anticipated income by $80,000 on that line item. The other was a correction. It was a double entry on both the revenue and the expense side for a matter for the police department, and that was about a little over $14,000. So the net effect is about $65,000, $66,000 to the good in terms of additional revenue, and that's reflected in the sheets that you were given earlier today.
Great. Thank you for that summary on the summary. Other questions for the town? Ken?
Yeah, I note the impact of new positions on salaries.
Yep.
And this was in 3 areas, which I think represented a changeover from the way we treated staffing generally up until this point.
Correct.
In that we would try to hold a line in staffing. But I actually like this, but I wondered if you might address this in a specific way. The changes that you have in the 3 areas of public safety, park and rec, and youth and family services are offset by grant funds. And so the impact on the taxpayer would be something like $35,000.
Correct.
Total. And I wondered in that, do you see that number as the tip of an iceberg that may grow, or do you feel it'll be controllable within the services that we have?
Those salary positions will grow, as do the other contracted salaries in town. At this point, we don't anticipate hiring any additional staff. We've evaluated these areas and determined that the needs of the business dictate that we do something. It's not easy to add personnel. However, there are times when the business requires it. And we talked a little bit about why we need it on the IT side. We talked about why we need it with the on the park and rec side. It's a decision we've made that we think will provide more efficient services on the park and rec side relative to garbage disposal. Yet, finally add in an additional resource that Park and Rec has been asking for year over year. So in terms of additional bodies beyond this, Ken, there is nothing on the horizon that suggests we're going to do anything more. And your point, and your original point about there are offsetting costs. The IT person, that salary will be offset by the consulting dollars that we're spending year in and year out. We will also get increased access to a resource which will support the single IT salaried employee on the town who is managing the balance outside of the police and fire department, is managing the IT needs. We don't have anybody in-house when he goes on vacation or is out sick. So this will also provide for backup and coverage. But to your earliest point, the offsets, yes, there are $137,000 in offsets on a $172,000 increase, so a net effect of about $35,000.
I haven't noticed, just watching youth and family services over the years, well, actually the last few months, the revenue line has increased. So can you address what's happening in youth and family services insofar as the need for additional staff is concerned?
There is no additional staff being added to Youth and Family Services. This is, for lack of a better term, an accounting adjustment. That individual has been in the position for 8 years. It has been offset by grant expenditures. We are actually bringing them into the employee headcount as a full-time employee now. You're correct. Youth and Family Services continues to drive revenue. Not that every department needs to be a profit center, because that is not what government is about, but they are able to offset some of their costs through the fee-for-services that they offer to the community.
So I kind of have a follow-up on that and a little bit of a segue, but I think it's important, especially after some of the public input earlier, that they realize that there's offsets to the maintainer that you want to hire for the garbage collection.
Right.
And then the differential of $35,000, though, I did want to maybe ask you a question about that. Is that just salary? Does that include impact of benefits as well?
It's not benefits. It's not
Okay,
benefits.
so
That's
it's higher.
Salary line item only.
By approximately maybe 30%?
You got an upload of 30%, 25,
Okay.
30%.
Okay, another question on that, too. Yeah, oh, you want, go
Can I
ahead.
just
Well, yeah,
ask
sure.
one since we
Then-
talked
then go
about
ahead.
technology?
I got
Yes, please.
a few left.
So could you just summarize, maybe just for the audience and for the viewing public, the benefits? So we made an investment in technology, and you're continuing that in this budget. Just talk about the benefits and some of the issues that we've had with our servers and why this is important moving forward.
Right, and there's a couple of layers to that. The first of which is this board was gracious enough to appropriate $150,000 for us to make significant investments in hardware and software, which have been long neglected over time. And those include security upgrades that we have been neglecting or putting off for a good number of years. So that project is fully underway. And one of the reasons we've done that is last year we lost a server that basically shut down Town Hall for 4 days as we had to rebuild it. We do not have redundant capacities in our infrastructure, and this project that you approved will give us that. In terms of the technology that is being implemented. The technology that is being used today, particularly in our public safety side, is dramatically more sophisticated than it was even 5 years ago. And both of our public safety agencies rely heavily on that, on that software and the hardware that runs it. So the resource that we are intending to hire is actually one who has done consulting work for us for a number of years. By bringing them in-house, as I said, we will have full opportunity to utilize that individual, as well as relieve one of our sworn police officers of the responsibility of being the IT guy when the consultant isn't around. Also, I believe Chief Shove is in the office, and he does IT as a hobby, and we're going to be able to free up some of his time. Is it best to have sworn officers doing IT services? I don't think so, and I know that the both of the chiefs feel as if this is the correct solution.
Just to follow up on that, so the public safety IT person will be working for both the fire department and the police department?
The role will be for public safety, all right, and also as a backup to the lone town hall resource. So it's not going to be a department, but they will work in conjunction together to make sure that nothing doesn't get done. So that resource will report is actually going to be, I think you recall, it's in the communications line, and I believe we're still working out the reporting procedure in terms of who signs the timesheet, but those are details that we'll figure out at some point.
But it's not a new position in either the fire department or the...
No, it's in
department.
communications.
Right.
That's right.
All right. Can I ask a little bit of a follow-up question about the new maintainer for the garbage collection?
Right.
We talked about it in one of the workshops, which was great, because I think it enlightened me that you're trying to get rid of a contracted service and replace it with a maintainer, and that there's offsetting costs here. So, just like we had at the public feedback is, the public is asking, why are you hiring this person? It looks like we're just going to spend the money. but there is the offset where we'll actually get rid of the contracted garbage
Right,
service.
which is about, anticipated this year to be $45,000.
Okay, and I think, you know, roughly, because I don't think we had every number to the penny, but we thought it was relatively a wash, but not really a wash, because the maintainer will only need to pick up garbage, was it 2 days a week?
2 days a week.
So we actually,
Anticipated to be 2 days a week on a normal schedule, but we'll have the flexibility to do something beyond that.
okay, so for a similar cost of what we were contracting for garbage service, theoretically, we're gonna get garbage service, and now a maintainer available 3 days to help with
Correct.
other things. Okay, so that, it doesn't sound like such a bad deal now when you sort of get some of the details. I did have one question, though.
Sure.
We're gonna buy a truck.
Yep.
And, you know, that was disclosed, and then, but it was also discussed that we might have to buy barrels that sort of fit the system of the truck, and that was another piece of the puzzle.
No, I believe at the budget hearings, they indicated that the barrels we have already will work with the mechanical arm on the vehicles they're looking to purchase. In fact, Rick Maynard was actually out in North Haven yesterday looking at one of those vehicles. There may even be an opportunity to buy a vehicle at less cost than we had estimated
Okay.
In the budget hearings.
Okay, so my question really actually goes to regionalization or even getting more bang for the buck.
Right.
And I think I asked the school this at one of our meetings, but they weren't really sure. But can we use this, you know, we're in the garbage business now.
Right.
Can we start picking up garbage for the
Well, it's-
school, the
it-
marina, maybe Madison, Branford?
Exactly. Rick Maynard and I had a conversation today. The Marina Commission is an independent commission. They pay for their own garbage pickup and service. And they have already approached Rick about whether or not the town would be able to do that on their behalf at a reduced price from what they're currently paying their hauler. I think I mentioned the other night that the town of Madison also has their own staff that does garbage pickup. But I understand that they are doing it the old-fashioned way, which is picking barrels up and throwing them onto the back of a truck, a dump truck themselves. So I've already had several conversations with Tom Banish about some regional opportunities. This will be one that will be added to that list if you decide that this is the way we should go. So that's the answer.
Great.
Cost of the vehicle?
Was it in the $45,000 range, I think? I'm gonna,
Is it part of?
My notes say 45 for the truck.
yeah, I think,
Part-
does that number
part-
sound
vehicles,
familiar,
right?
Jonathan?
Is it less?
Was it more? Was it less? 120. Okay.
Way off of the truck.
The contract was 45,000, I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay. Great. Ken?
See, legal is at close to 17% increase?
Yes. That's, as I mentioned the other night, that's budgeting to reality. That's based on what our run rates that are currently going on. We have some significant challenges, legal challenges, that we don't think will be completely resolved until this 19-20 budget is exhausted.
So get a little follow-up on that one. Do you want to go?
Let me go real
Sure.
quick and then go back to you. We'll just trying to spread it around.
Yep.
If I could, to the debt service. I want to make sure that I actually somewhat try to address the public forum kind of question regarding that. When I was looking at this, and of course it's on one of these sheets, but what I'm trying to recall is the breakdown actually on the debt service for the town and school is about $4.7 million. That's for the town and school. The high school alone on the new construction is $4.85 million. The increase from last year to this year is actually, if I saw this correctly, there's actually a decrease in the debt service on the town and the school from last year's number. And the increase is almost completely in the JHS construction, which I also know that the energy performance contract is also part of the debt service. We put it into that. So my question is it correct? The entire debt service is not, it's almost a 50-50 split on town, school, and high school.
Correct.
But the increase
Right.
that we're realizing seems to be almost entirely the high school, because it looked like the town and school actually went down. It's starting, we're having old debt starting to roll off. That's why I wanted you to
I'd call it
clarify.
flat, Mike. It's
Flat.
mostly flat on the town and school side.
Okay.
The spreadsheet, not spread, the slide.
Right.
That you had asked Mary Jane specifically for.
Yep.
I think shows that, and we can certainly provide you with the exact breakdown, but it's relatively flat. And just to answer your question, the new high school debt represents 49% of our total debt payments. The existing school debt is about 18%, and the town is about 33%. And to answer Jamie's questions earlier, some of the things that are comprised of that are other projects that the school has done, health and safety projects, that have a long-term life and are appropriate for bonding. On the town side, we have rescue and fire vehicles, we have public works vehicles, we're also paying for road construction. You may recall we did 3 major road elevation projects as part of our sustainability and coastal resilience program. And those are the things that drive the town side, in addition to some of our own buildings that we need to maintain as well. And that's what is driving the bonded indebtedness on the town side. Thanks, Mike. Thank you.
All right, if you're ready. Otherwise, I have one more and then I'm done.
I just wanted to follow up about the legal costs. They really do seem to be rising, and, sometimes that's out of our control. And sometimes maybe it might have been in our control if we operate a little more smartly. But do we have a strategy to reduce legal costs going forward? I mean, have we sort of looked at this and said, maybe we got to change the way we're...
Actually, my strategy, Jonathan, was when I stepped into the job. When I negotiated for legal services, I brought in outside counsel, I brought in a new outside counsel, and I brought in a new bond counsel and a second firm to do assessment appeals. In all cases, they committed to a lower hourly rate than the previous firms were charging us. So yes, we are trying to control that line item as best we can.
I have a question.
Go ahead, as I swallow my drink. Go ahead.
Can we talk about the wash bay?
You certainly can.
Tuesday night, I think I heard you say that we had already, that was, part of the wash bay was in a prior bond authorization, but it turned out the cost is much higher than we anticipated. So you're asking for another $350,000 for the wash bay. My question is, do we know where this wash bay is gonna go? Do we have a site for it?
Yes. We have room on the current public works facility.
And is there opportunities, how do we wash our trucks now? We used to
Right.
go to Milford, and we don't do that anymore.
We were, for the last few years, we were washing them in the yard,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
was a clear violation of DEP MS4
Yeah.
run. And we actually have noted, in our 2 last inspections from DEEP, they've noted that. They also understand, like a lot of other communities, that we don't necessarily have the resources immediately available to fix that situation. So what we have done is we've taken one of the garage bays, and we have turned it into a wash station. And it's rudimentary at best.
Do-it-yourself wash
It's
bay.
do-it-yourself wash bay. And it's highly inefficient, because we have to have it pumped out there. We don't have a water oil separator, all right? And you can imagine after washing 16 or 17 trucks, we also have Park and Recs trucks that do our parking lots, et cetera, that we are now need to be washed there too.
And where are the school trucks being washed?
That's a question that's probably better answered by somebody else.
Where are the school trucks being washed?
We take them to an off-site facility in North Branford.
And is that, your trucks are not like
No.
the massive Mack trucks? They're like a normal,
Most are pickup size, we have one larger
pickup
plow
size,
truck.
F-150s, that type. Sorry.
That's correct. Now, the wash bay also creates an opportunity for us
That's what I.
in terms
that
of
was what I was
regionalization.
gonna- yeah.
Because today, we can't take them to North Branford. The closest thing we could take them to is one of the, I think it's over in Milford, with the truck stop over on the
Yeah,
other side
that's-
of Milford. So we could theoretically take them over there, paying the premium for gasoline to get back and forth, keeping our guys off the road. They're not working, they're actually driving to that location. And by the way, you're doing it during the middle of the winter when the road conditions are going to create additional dirt as they just travel. So the efficiency is not there. But this is an opportunity for us to look at bringing other towns in, particularly in Madison and North Branford or Branford, because they are all faced with the same situation.
What does the state do? Do they have their own
They have
wash
their
bays?
own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's some contention that someone saw trucks being washed at the state garage in Guilford on Route 1, and they were washing them in the parking lot.
Yeah.
There was,
Oh, yeah, no, if you follow up, go ahead. On one of the, at the workshops, one of the issues with regard to we've made the investment in new trucks
Right.
and equipment.
Yep.
And those new trucks and equipment have more computerized and electronics.
Correct.
And one of the issues that was explained to us at the workshop is that with our new do-it-yourself wash bay, they can't really access the areas underneath the trucks
right.
where a lot of the electronics are most exposed to the road.
elements, right.
The elements. So while they're washing the exterior, the part that the wash bay would address, if I'm remembering correctly, is is kind of the brains of the truck, the electronics and the computers that are being exposed to the salt and sand.
right, and they do the best they can. They have
Right.
a power washer.
It's
but
no
they
knock on
literally
them,
are-
they just can't get under it.
Yeah. The wash stations that we're looking at are similar in nature to the ones you'd find in a commercial where you take your car, but they also have water that emanates from underneath so that they can get to that equipment.
So if we're not able to address it, the risk is that we're
Risk is-
going to break our trucks down faster than they otherwise might, or
Could be.
lead to more expensive repairs because
Repairs.
the computer system that breaks down needs to be replaced, and then the truck doesn't operate if the computer's not working.
Right, and then when they're not operating, we're not plowing roads, and we're getting a lot of calls at town hall.
Jonathan, go ahead.
All right, so the wash bay discussion continues.
Certainly.
And, it's no secret that I'm not a big fan of the car wash business as maybe I am of the garbage business. But, in the various workshops, I've keep asking the town, do we really know that this is cost effective? Have we done some kind of cost benefit analysis? And I know some of your answer is that it's not all driven by a cost benefit analysis, it's driven by environmental issues. But I got some pretty big concerns too, that I don't think any municipalities with our kind of similar budget are trying to take on a facility like this. Right now, the cost, I guess, is roughly $850,000 just to get it built. Have we figured out any cost it would take to operate it and maintain it? How many people?
We're already paying for pump outs. That would be a cost that goes down, actually, Jonathan, because we'll have the oil separator. So, and this wash bay recycles the water. You pull the elements out, and those are disposed of, but the water continues to be reused. So there will be operational efficiencies created as a result of less water, less pump outs.
Okay, I mean,
And
I
again,
think about that in comparison to, building this pretty sizable and costly facility and then running it, electricity.
It's not that
Manpower.
big. It's going to be big enough to house a truck at a time. So,
Okay, for me anyway, two final questions.
Okay.
Safer grant. Could you remind the board or remind me the effect of the Safer grant this year, next year, and the year after? Because it's reducing. I'm just wondering what the amounts were on
right,
that
we
Safer grant.
actually, as of April 1st, we start the second year, and that's still at the 75% reimbursement rate, and that runs through to April of 2020. And we've accommodated the reduction in the grant because that becomes a third year, we're at 35%. So we get 9 months at 75, we get 3 months at 35, and then the subsequent year we get 9 months at 35 and 3 months at 0.
And just so the public understands, the SAFER grant is the funding for the...
SAFER grant is the funding, it's the incentive grant that was provided by the federal government for us to enhance our fire protection services, fire and emergency medical response services.
Which is what led to the increase in
Which is what led to the hiring of the 8 new firefighters to man and staff the North Guilford Fire Station.
A little bit of a follow-up question on that.
Sure.
And this doesn't come out of a lot of thought, but just seeing how the additional firefighters up in North Guilford have helped with replacement costs for the fire department, would there be some kind of similar model where if we added police that were stationed up in North Guilford, that we would actually have lower costs or a reasonable trade-off and provide better service for police response in North Guilford?
That's a good question. I think, if we had a station up there, there might be less gasoline traveling back and forth to the station. There are not the same efficiencies with the police department as there are with the fire department.
Yeah, I think
and
those are
largely,
controlled.
and largely what the rationale for the North Guilford station is response times on EMS, as well as fire stuff. And that is the rationale for the North Guilford station. If I'm speaking out of turn, both chiefs, please. Oh.
Just for confirmation purposes for later on, the number that we would be looking at regarding the bonded capital projects for vehicles, equipment, what's the number that we're looking at?
We've made some changes to this since you last saw it.
Right.
We removed the Guilford High School turf field. We moved off a couple of the public works trucks, one of the public works trucks into the subsequent year. And we also have now included bonding associated costs to each project. So the number you see in front of you for fiscal year 2019-2020 is a request for $783,000, and for 2021, $2,754,000, as broken out in the manner in front of you.
Which is a two-year bond.
That's a 2-year bond package, and for a number of years, the town has been operating on every other year we would come request bond funds. So this continues that. We did not ask for any bonded funds last year. So this year represents, as I said, a 2-year. There is a couple of things I just want you to be aware of. There are some other projects that may pop their head up that require us to do some other things. We can't size them or scale them right now. For those that are aware, we had a significant issue with the seawall down at Falcon Road, down at Satcham's Head, which is going to require some investment. We're working with DEP to determine what we can do there. And earlier today, I met with 11 residents of Circle Beach Road. Put your hand up if you know where Circle Beach Road is. There you go. All right. Well, you grew up in town. That's right. That's how you got out to Grass Island, right? We have the 11 residents out there. Actually, Guilford owns about a half a mile of that, the end of Circle Beach Road, and they are experiencing significant problems accessing their property during significant high tides, literally having to drive their vehicles through 1.5 feet, 2 feet of water at some of these extreme high tides. So in 2008, the town made an investment in that road. They took some of the millings from the highway to reconstruct that road back in 2008. But it's at a point now where they're concerned about access to that facility, and they're concerned about the ability for public safety vehicles to get there as well. So this is something that I had become aware of. I've already engaged our town engineer as well as the Madison town engineer, because it's not just our portion of that road that is experiencing trouble. And we've reached out to the state of Connecticut because they own a boat launch down there, and access to that boat launch, which is a major recreational opportunity for the state. Anybody in the state can use that boat launch for free. So, we understand that they are looking to invest more money in that boat launch area. So there could be an opportunity for us to partner with the state. Just putting something out there that's on the horizon in terms of some capital stuff that we haven't talked about that is just recently emerging. So.
See, in the 2 days since we got the original bonded capital projects, you dropped off the dump trucks, you dropped them down by about...
We moved it to the second year. We moved one of them to the second year.
one into the second year? No, I think into the second year, you had 3.5 million, then now it's 3.7 million over 2 years. But I was
The other way
looking at
around.
the
No, it's still
3.5.
3.5. Right down here, 3.5.
3.5,
Yeah, I already mentioned
3.7.
And Ken, we took out 300 from the number you saw the other day.
Yeah,
We just
okay.
moved it around a little bit, so the total is now, is 300 less, plus our bond issuance costs are now in each of these projects, as we're attributed to each one.
I was going to let you go, but while you're up here, maybe we should talk about it now. You had talked about recommendations
Yes.
regarding for the public, we have a fairly healthy medical benefits,
Correct.
surplus or reserve.
It's surplus in the medical account.
Right. And that number, let's just say it's north of 4 million. And that's,
We anticipate it will be north of 4 million this year based
that's the
on current
anticipation.
projections.
Right. I know we don't have to necessarily take action on it, but this is a time where the public is hearing our budget.
Correct.
And we know that it's healthy, and there were a couple of recommendations of 400,000 that we're going to have to deal with in a couple of years regarding
Right.
revaluation.
Right.
And then funding of a trust for OPEB,
Right.
rather than pay as you go,
Correct.
having that as a trust. I think you would recommend, we've been talking about numbers, it could be 100,000, but we're talking maybe more 700,000 to really fund it. Right now, we have, I think we put, was it
200.
was it 200?
200. Right.
So it's something that we don't have to necessarily decide tonight as a board, but I do think that it's something that we need to address in the budget. And when you have an unassigned balance like that for what are, one-time, basically infusions, right? At least for the trust, it's an infusion of money to be able to start building upon. The reval, we used to budget 100,000, 150,000 every year.
Every
We used
year,
to
right.
just do it rolling, but we haven't been doing that.
Nope.
And at some point, we're going to have to address that.
Right.
So this is not just for this board, but it's also for the public, to at least let them know that there may be some allocations in the future, and making sure that those are not in this budget. Those are not in this budget, but we do have a healthy surplus in the medical benefits.
We do, and the reason I had brought this up during this, over the last month or so, was in deference to a couple of the board members who, last year, objected to moving any fund balance surpluses outside of the budget cycle. So in deference to that sentiment, I thought it would be best to bring it to your attention that you might want to consider doing that now. If not now, then some point in the future, and you bring up a good point. This allows the community to focus more on it at this time, because more people are paying attention to what we're doing right now than they do the rest of the year. So my recommendation to this board, and again, just a recommendation, is that you take a significant look at allocating $700,000 or $800,000 out of that medical account to the other post-employment benefit fund that you voted to establish last year, which was prudent. We have, as currently identified, about a $28 million liability for other post-employment benefits, and we have been paying for it as you go, as I mentioned the other night. So the opportunity to set up a trust similar to what we have done with traditional pension obligations, makes some sense. And Jonathan, to your point that, I do listen to you. You don't always think so. But how do you put some of these dollars to work for the taxpayers? These dollars will go to work for the taxpayers in a longer-term manner, because at some point they won't have to pony that up as on a pay-as-you-go basis, particularly if you build an effective trust where you're earning on that and building that inherently. So this is one of those opportunities where eventually the taxpayers are going to see relief, because we have built a trust that is able to earn money on its assets. So, and then the reval, it's a question of whether you want to move any money for that. I wouldn't necessarily suggest you move medical funds to that, because I'm not sure that that's an appropriate use of those, because there are multiple types of contributions to that account. But I would say that the OPEB trust would be a very appropriate use of those funds.
And I know we've got a couple more months left in this particular year. If I were to make a recommendation, I'd like to address this sooner than later. Tonight we have enough to do, but I would like to have it on the agenda in the next couple regular meetings, one of the next couple regular meetings, so we can address that amount, to see how it's trending, because we're getting close to the end of that fiscal year.
Correct.
And we are healthy, and sometimes we know that the number is good, and for a couple months, and then all of a sudden we get a hit. And so, just to be a little bit more on the side of caution, I think we should get it on the agenda. Well, the one coming up, we've got the audit, so that's going to be a lot of fun. But in April, maybe we should get that on the agenda.
I'll be happy to talk about it whenever you deem it.
I'm sure you would. I'm sure you would. Anybody else have any questions for?
Any news from Hartford since we met last with regard to what's coming our way or not coming our way from the state?
No, not since Tuesday. Again, I've had some conversations with both Sean and Christine. We were at the Human Services Council meeting yesterday morning, and as you can well imagine, a lot of the members of the Human Services Council were very concerned about the budgets in Hartford. Not so much concerned about what happened to municipalities, but concerned about what happens to their funding. And I actually made a comment early in the thing where I mentioned that at some point, communities like Guilford may need to consider zeroing out the expectation of funds from Hartford. Of the three sitting at the table, Vin Candelora grabbed the mic out of my hands and said, "That will never happen." So, but there are realistic expectations that, it's going to continue to diminish. What's the floor? I don't know. And I think you guys are going to have some discussion about what to do. The last year I had the privilege of sitting at that table. We were almost zeroed out by Governor Malloy, and we anticipated a 35% cut in our ECS money at the time, which amounted to about $1 million, and we took that. So, no new news, but certainly, I wish I could give you better guidance.
Sure.
So if it's all right, maybe a comment on the OPEB funding, if you don't mind.
Certainly.
So, I would support some OPEB funding, based on a pension-like fund.
Right.
I think it's sound financial policy. And then I think that for years I really dislike, funds that sort of grow and grow and grow and have these sort of little war chests that are piling up instead of providing benefit to taxpayers. But what I can't get my head around is that we decide to take that money out and use it for some kind of spending. That, to me, has to be in the budget. That has to be asked for, and then the voters need a chance to decide at referendum if they approve of that kind of spending. But surpluses in those funds, I'd be more than willing to return to taxpayers, because I feel like when funds grow too large and they're overfunded, that it's really a sign of overtaxing the resident, and money should be returned. So it's hard for me to get my head around saying, hey, we'll just decide outside of the referendum process if we can take some money out of some fund and use it for some kind of spending.
I won't quibble with you. I will suggest that you remember that's it was probably 6 or 7 years ago, we ran a deficit, and we were in a deficit position in our medical account. And the town had to bring in about 500, between the town and the Board of Education. We had to fund it with about $500,000. So the question is, what's a reasonable level to keep for a balance in that account?
True.
The consultants and the actuaries say it should be two times your monthly expenditures. Yeah, and they're saying close to, they're saying, yeah, which, that's changed over time. And yes, it is taxpayer money that's sitting on the sideline, but it's taxpayer money that's sitting there because that's best practices. And again, we've had this conversation, anything above that can be considered for appropriate use for certain items. And we think this is an appropriate one. And back to your point, this board is empowered by the state statutes and the charter to move monies from designated funds without referendum, without asking the voters to weigh in on it. And that's the power that is vested in you by the state statute and the charter. I was merely reacting to the sensitivities that you expressed last year when we did it outside the budget cycle.
And now we're on public record, so. Not that we weren't before, but we're in more apparent, yeah.
Right.
Anybody else have anything else? Anything for Matt?
If you would indulge me for a minute?
Sure.
I don't believe all of Susan's points were addressed or answered relative to regionalism.
That'd be great.
And the golf course. As I mentioned last Tuesday, the Board of Selectmen has charged me with putting a task force together to see what we do with the golf course long-term. This is an issue that Ken Gammerman and I have been trading elbows about for how long? 15 years or whatever? But we are at a point where we need to decide to do something with it. Does every department have to break even? No, it doesn't. Park and Rec doesn't break even. The seniors program doesn't break even. The beach doesn't break even, all right? Youth and Family Services doesn't break even. Social Services doesn't break even. But there's an argument to be made that's quality of life stuff may need to try to support itself. And we'll have a discussion about that at some point, as I know you'd be willing to. But in terms of the regionalization stuff, earlier this year, I signed a letter of intent with the Department of Public Health to investigate consolidating health districts with Madison and Killingworth. That's an ongoing expense. Preliminary numbers don't look very good because they charge on a per capita basis. And the fact that we're one of the larger of those three towns means that if efficiencies are to come out of the system and there are less resources available, we may not get to do the inspections in the timeliness and the fashion. But we're looking at it. You're also aware that the waste transfer station is a shared service with Madison, and we have money allocated in this budget. It's the first time in my recollection since we built that station that we have actually looked at a capital infusion at that facility. It's long overdue, and Madison has agreed. There was one other one.
The boat.
What's that?
The boat.
The fireboat. I'm not going to talk to the fireboat. That's a regional initiative that Guilford is taking on, and there are operational costs to that. But if you want an answer from the chief, I'd be happy to either of the chiefs to talk about the operation of that boat.
I think it was funded by a federal
It
grant.
was funded, but
Yeah.
there are obviously ongoing maintenance costs. I think the Marina Commission gives us the slip for free, if I'm not mistaken, right?
They better.
Anything else?
I'm all set. Anybody else on the board?
Nope.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we go into discussion regarding our thoughts on the budgets that have been presented, I do want to provide some level of recap of what we have heard and effects, which again, I guess this will be repetitive to what we did on Tuesday night, but a little less detail. So on the expenditure side, or the budgets that have been presented, the town operating budget Requested is $30,607,971, which is a 3.87% increase from the 2018-19 budget. The total debt service request is $9,516,344. That is a percent change of 12% from the 18-19 budget. And the education operating budget is a request of $60,675,831 for a percent change of 1.98%. These combined are a budget of $100,800,146, which is a 3.43% increase. Based on looking at the revenues that we were provided, and I will do one prior to the governor's budget and one after in the effect. Basically, this is for mill rate purposes. The net change in non-tax revenue is a $690,117 increase from last year's budget. This would be a total of $6,510,291. The remaining to be raised through property taxes. When we take a look at the grand list, which has gone up by 0.491%, actually, a grand list, I'm just making sure I have my numbers right here and I've got the right sheet, is we have a prior year mill rate of 31.28, a projected mill rate that would be at 31.95 or 2.13%. That is as of, let's just say, February 19th. On February 20th, we received a proposed budget from the governor that we have also been looking at and considering in looking at the numbers. I know the board has, anyway. The governor's proposed budget would decrease the amount of ECS, Board of Education funding, an amount of $587,488. There would be a teacher's retirement contribution that would be made of $166,052. And what this would ultimately do is bring in a projected mill rate, got to shift sheets here, of 32.20 or 2.95% mill rate increase. So we've had presented budgets, and we've had sheets that have talked about prior to and after a proposed budget by the governor, and as you just heard, we are not really certain where this is all going to go. And I think that it's fair to say, before we talk about where we feel with the budgets, when we looked at what was, now originally it was 2.2% mill rate increase, but there was what you just heard tonight, there was a change in the sheets which actually made it 2.13, so that's why it's different tonight than Tuesday. But we were looking at the possibility with some reduction of getting under 2% on a mill rate increase. And I've been on this board long enough, and I was on the board obviously when the high school passed, that I think anybody that thought that we were going to be looking at those type of increases, that were, there was speculation that we would be 3-4% tax increases because the high school debt service was going to be out of line. I will just say, to start off the conversation, that I'm very impressed by these budgets. And I will probably say it again when I start any comments I make, but we've been at this now for 3+ months. So maybe this is news to people watching on television, news to anybody in the audience, but we've been looking at these numbers, and I will tell you that sometimes we get accused of not looking at every line item. I can tell you, on behalf of this board, we look at every line item that is in these budgets, and we do everything we can to see if there's anything, but I will tell you the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen did a lot of work on these budgets. I know the Board of Selectmen cut an incredible amount out on capital. I think I even say that in some of my notes, what that amount is. And there was a lot of cutting that was done and reductions. So I just want to say that I'm very impressed by the work that was done to get to where we are. And of course, we did get some help on the grand list. We didn't get that help last year. We had a reduction in the grand list, but we also had some interest income. That also helps. So you take advantage of things when you can, and if that means a mill rate under 2 that we were looking at, I'm perfectly, I'm pretty happy with that. That is a start as we go into our discussions right now. So does anybody want to kick off on the discussions?
I'll start. Can I start?
Yeah, you can
I'll
call.
be quick.
Go ahead.
So I just wanted to commend the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen because I think these budgets were really thoughtful and I think they tried to do a lot without really increasing. I think they tried to invest in the future of our town, but with really trying to keep the costs down. And I think you see that through a lot of the creative partnerships. I think you see that through the behavioral health program. It's not adding staff, but they're being able to expand it. And I think there's a lot of factors in this budget that we just don't have control over. Union contracts, you know, we don't really have control over them. And I will remind everybody that the union contracts, they did concede quite a bit on their health benefits over the last several years. So we've seen a significant savings going to an HSA. An HSA with a high deductible plan that the unions voluntarily went into, which I think is important. And I also think it's important to remind the public that those contracts, behind those contracts are people. So those are our teachers, those are our custodians, those are our lunch servers, those are our professionals within the town hall, so that they're not just numbers, but they're people driven. And I think that's really important to remind the public of. You know, the debt service, it is what it is, but it gave us great facilities in town. Tuition on the Board of Ed side, I think it's smart to budget more considering the trend that we've seen over this past year. And I think it's one of those line items that we all know it could go down, it could go up. You can't really control who moves into town and who leaves. But we're obligated federally and state mandated to provide those services to those kids. And they deserve those services. On the revenue side, I know the state funding is questionable. I think it's important to just remind the public that the governor does present a budget and then the legislature will also present a budget. So I think that is a process where tonight we're going to have to make some kind of tough decision based on a lot of unknowns. But I do think that there is room for restoring funding. I don't think we'll ever, to your point, I don't think we'll ever get to zero funding, because if we did, then we basically wouldn't have to meet any state mandates for education. You could just do whatever you wanted. So I don't see that as a reality ever, but we'll see. So for me, I think that in many ways, there's not a lot of room to cut, in my opinion. I think that for the services that we're getting and for the efficiencies that we're trying to implement that are going to give us long-term savings, I am certainly not comfortable doing a significant cut to the Board of Ed. And I think we also have to remember that there's a reason that our enrollment is not as low as Madison or other towns, because we are providing a really good service at a really good rate, and people are moving into Guilford for those services. So it is a good place to live and work and raise a family. And I really don't want us to put off projects just for the sake of putting them off, especially if they're going to long-term save us money. I certainly don't want to burden my future children with projects that we could start now. So for me personally, I don't see anything, I wouldn't be comfortable with anything more than a $200,000 cut to this budget. I think they're really, really good budgets. I think they're forward-thinking. I think both the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen have put in a lot of thought in terms of the vision over the next several years, the energy performance contract, the maximizing our investments, upgrades to our technology, investing in the behavioral health of our children. I just think those are really, really forward-thinking projects. And having not grown up in Guilford and gone to a regional school, they're great, but they can also be problematic, because once enrollment goes down in one town, then you're fighting over who's paying for what. So, and they don't provide as many services. So I think that, I think it's a tough budget to cut, in my opinion. Yeah.
Thank you. Others?
I think we might have to change the tape, Mr. Chairman.
2 minutes? Cut it. Restroom break. Perfect timing.